Every year I sew myself a dress for my birthday. It's a tradition I've had for over a decade. And here's what I'm using this year. I've picked a tried and true vintage sewing pattern, Simplicity 4432 from the early 1960s. I'm going to be honest, this is the pattern I've used for the most dresses that are my favorites to wear over the last few years. I even said in my blog 2 years ago that it was my favorite go-to bodice then, and that has not changed since. It's the perfect backdrop for a great print. I really like how the bodice fits me, and the pattern is like an old friend. Is this weird? My fabric is a cute, bold floral print for spring. I got this cotton on big sale at Joann Fabrics, so it was only about $15. Particularly since I've really been enjoying more fun earrings lately, I love the idea of letting the fabric print or the jewelry be the statement. Now I could pretty much just sew this bodice on repeat with different prints and be perfectly happy. I'm not sure that would make for very good YouTube sewing always, so I promise I will not just do that. But I also don't mind a fun little embellishment on occasion, and in fact, I used this same dress pattern for the dress that I sewed with the ribbon trim last year. I'll link to that video in the description. For this dress though, I may just make a little rouleau loop and tie it into a bow and trim the bodice with that. I'm also going to make a new silicone mold of this cute vintage floral belt buckle slide so that I can make a resin buckle to go with the matching belt for the dress, and I'm also going to make a pair of earrings too. So let's go do it! Oh, this is my new express line cardigan pattern, by the way. You can get it on Ravelry and Payhip. I love it. It's perfect for spring, warm and cozy. So I've noticed over time that I have a tendency to plan a dress project without thinking through if I have a zipper when I sit down to actually start the project. And it occurred to me, this is sort of a random pale green background color. Probably don't have a zipper that color. Guess what? I do! Ha-ha! But immediately before I started to cut out my fabric, I decided I actually did want to tweak something with the bodice. I remembered that my belts always ride up a little bit with this dress bodice, so I compared the bodice length with a dress bodice that doesn't do that, and decided to try shortening this a scant 1/4 of an inch. So that's what I'm doing here, and just tracing new pieces. You can watch my tracing video to learn all the reasons why I love to trace my pattern pieces. I'll link it in the description. And what I'm doing is such a small difference, I don't even know if I'll be able to tell in the end, but it definitely won't ruin things if it does end up a little bit too short. And I periodically make minute adjustments to my tried and true patterns, so we'll see what I think here. Maybe it'll be a winner, maybe it won't. So then on to cutting out this dress. Sorry about all the shadows, by the way. I was cutting out first thing in the morning, so I'm backlit by the window behind me. This print is exactly what I'm feeling this spring. Bold, cheerful colors or prints. I just love it. If you know me by now from my channel, you may realize that it's about now when I will say I'm about to match the print across the center back seam. So for all the good details on the super easy way I do this, check out my recent print matching tutorial. I'll link it in the description. Okay, this is the part where I usually sit and stare at things for a while because it is time to cut out the skirt. Now I'm going to do a gathered skirt, and so my options here are cut it on grain with the same direction that I cut the bodice pieces and get a slightly less full skirt, or cut it cross grain, and I have more fabric left if I cut it cross grain. And then I will have a slightly more gathered skirt, and the print will run in the opposite direction. So the bodice, the flowers, would run top left to bottom right, and on the skirt, they would run top right to bottom left, or from your perspective, top right to bottom left. So I often cut skirts on the cross grain, and I think that's what I'm going to do here. I think that it's nice when the print breaks up a little bit from the bodice to the skirt, if it doesn't look weird. Like obviously, you know, if you had a really directional print, you wouldn't want certain things upside down, but these are just flowers. And it'll be broken up with a belt between. So I'm inclined to do that and get myself a little bit fuller of a skirt. I could theoretically just cut it in one piece and then just have the zipper seam in the back, but I'm going to add side seams so that I can have pockets. And is this my final decision? I think this is my final decision. I'm going to do it. So with that decision made on how to cut out the skirt, that left me with a long strip of fabric at one side, which was perfect for cutting out my belt and all of the side pocket pieces. I just have a standard pocket piece that I use for everything. I think I modified it from a dress pattern piece in Gertie's Ultimate Dress Book ages ago, and have since made it big enough to fit my phone. And once all the fabric pieces were cut out, I could move on to interfacing. You know how I said that I sew this pattern a lot. The last time I sewed this bodice, I accidentally cut one too many back facing pieces. So I've had this sitting on my sewing table since that moment, waiting to sew this again because I knew I would, and then I could use this and cut out one less piece. Here's the problem sometimes about filming while I'm sewing, is it means that I pay like, I don't know, 5% less attention sometimes to details that I should be paying attention to. So this is ridiculous, but I just went to the ironing board and realized that the irony is I had one piece of interfacing waiting to use for a back piece, and then I accidentally cut one front piece, and then the back piece mirrored. So I need to cut half a front piece so I can just have a little, part in the middle where they meet, and then cut the back piece that I accidentally mirrored in half, which means I will still have one extra back piece until the next time I sew this dress. So on to the pinning party. Hot on the heels of my video where I was batch sewing pants, I went the extra mile pinning absolutely everything I could possibly pin at this stage here. And it's weird only sewing one article of clothing after sewing 4 at the same time. I almost decided that I should sew 2 dresses, but decided not to. So I pinned and sewed the bodice starts and the shoulder seams of the facings, and the skirt pockets, and the long side of the belt, and probably something else I'm forgetting. And before I pressed all that, I also serged the raw edges of my facings, which is usually how I tend to finish facings, unless I just feel like doing a narrow hem or the fabric is sheer. I did realize about halfway through sewing all those things that I'd forgotten to stay stitch the neckline and armhole edges, so I did take a moment to do that before moving on to the next steps. I'm about to sit down and sew the tip of my belt and the shoulder seams of my bodice and the side seams of my skirt. And in case you're curious, I am still picking corduroy fluff from everything, including all of the fabric for this dress from my batch sewing of my corduroy pants. Told you I'd be doing it until the end of time. So, got all those things sewed and then finished off the raw edges of my skirt side seams on the serger. And while at the ironing board to press everything then, I also took the opportunity to turn my belt inside out. And you can watch my tutorial on how to make a matching belt just like this. I'll link it in the description. I actually keep my tube turner in the cubbies that you see just behind my ironing board, which is why I'm always standing here when I do it. I always talk about using fusible knit stay tape to reinforce my lap zipper areas, and I think it's perfect for that. The one I use is from Emma Seabrook. And the reason why I do it on the skirt, this is the skirt center back here. The reason why I do it on the skirt midway through the project is because I need to know how long to cut this. And that's based on the length of the dress bodice and then how long I have left on my zipper. So I've just marked that after I've pinned together everything on my bodice. You would think I would, maybe have made a note since I've sewn this bodice so many times, how long it needs to be. No, I haven't. So here I am doing it in the middle of the project. And again, trying to get as much done at any given station as I can. After adding the stay tape for the zipper, I ran my 2 rows of basting stitches so I could gather the skirt later. On to assembling the bodice, and you can see that little seam from accidentally cutting the interfacing wrong for the facings, no big deal. So I'm pinning the neckline of the bodice and the facing here, and then after sewing that, I'll trim and grade the seam allowance, clip the curves, which is super important to get it to lay nice, and then understitch the neckline. So I've just understitched my neckline. So my neckline is all finished and looking really nice. And I'm going to flip this inside out in a minute and sew up the armholes. And you can watch my all-in-one facing tutorial for the full details on that technique. But I wanted to show you that I discovered just a minute ago that there's a minor fabric imperfection right on the front, which is kind of annoying. I mean, I guess I'm glad this was cheap fabric because that's really annoying when it's expensive or vintage fabric, but kind of a bummer that that's there, but it's so small. Hopefully I won't ever think about it again after this dress is assembled, which is likely going to be the case. I rarely think of things like that afterwards, but too bad seeing that. Next up is pretty much the same thing for the armholes as I did for the neckline. sewing them shut, trimming and grading and understitching, and then pulling the backs through to the front. It honestly always looks a bit mangled and wrinkly when I do that, so it can make you second guess yourself and how it's going, but with a good press at this point, that's when a sleeveless bodice constructed like this starts to look really nice. And here's my fully assembled bodice, except for closing up the side seams, and this is such a pretty looking bodice already. I can tell this dress is going to be great, perfect for spring and summer. Loving this print. Everything is all set up now for me to insert my zipper after I have assembled this with the skirt. And you can see it looks nice and tidy from the inside view with my all-in-one facing, and all I have to do now is fold up those edges and match them up, close up the side seams, and I can attach the skirt and then get to that zipper. So my side seams are done, and all I have to do is tack down the facing to the side seam, and I can either do this by hand or stitch in the ditch, and often I would just stitch in the ditch just kind of at the end of the facing, but honestly my thread is the background color, this light green, and so even if I stitch in the ditch, you might just see it a little bit. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do it by hand this time. And I don't mind this little hand sewing step anyway. And with the bodice complete, I will now briefly change crafts completely to two different crafts, in fact. I've made resin jewelry and buttons and some of my own silicone molds on and off for several years, and I've been in a real on period right now. So I wanted to make a silicone mold of this vintage Bakelite daisy-shaped belt buckle slide to make a matching resin buckle for this dress. And I also wanted to make a pair of resin earrings cast in molds that I made from acrylic pieces that I designed and had cut out just to make resin earrings. Now I do get a lot of requests for tutorials on all this, but I haven't come up with a good way to really film it yet. And frankly, I'm certainly no expert. I just enjoy dabbling, and I actually like that this is an area where I let go of some of my perfectionist tendencies. But hopefully someday I can put something together for you. And I'll get back to the dress while I wait for the belt buckle and earring pieces to cure overnight to find out if I managed to get close to the blue color in the dress, which I'm not really convinced that I did, so I might be trying again. In the meantime, it's time to pin the gathered skirt to the bodice and sew the waistline seam. I love when I get to this stage because it's really starting to look like a dress at this point, and then I can move on to the zipper. Of course, I'm doing a lap zipper for my dress like always. I honestly couldn't even tell you how to sew an invisible zipper because I haven't done one in probably about 15 years, but lap zippers I can pretty much do in my sleep. And for my center back zipper dresses, it always starts off with lining up the right side of the zipper on the right back side of the dress. If you watched my batch sewing pants video, you'll know I use a totally different technique for those lap zippers, and I promise I really am going to do tutorials on both techniques. I'm working on this. And here I soon get a glimpse of the print matching across the center back seam, which is looking great. And that little bit at the top that I find fussy, I always hand baste it. Don't be afraid to come up with your own best practices. They don't have to be the quote-unquote right way to do something. If it works for you, then that's all that matters in the end. So just the top stitching on the zipper to go, and then hand sewing the facing shut. I love the irony that I accidentally have the zipper peeking out just a little bit more than usual at the top of the back of the dress, but I don't really care. But I did undo my hand stitching on the facing and redid it since I wasn't satisfied. I pick and choose what I feel like being a perfectionist about at any given point, and that's the beauty of doing it yourself. You can be the boss about what you do and don't want to care about, and it doesn't have to be the same for every project. And who doesn't love a good print matching zipper reveal? So here we go. So with that done, the things that I have left to do are the hem and finishing off the belt. I need to add in my belting. And speaking of, I have now unmolded my resin earring pieces and my belt buckle. And honestly, I think that color came out great. It matches perfectly, so I'm very pleased with that. Now the belt buckle itself doesn't have much of a shine to it because the way silicone and resin works is when you make a silicone mold, the finished item that you cast in it will have whatever finish the original item had. And the original Bakelite buckle that I made this from is relatively matte. So if I want, I could polish this up. So I'll decide if I feel like bothering with that. And then I've got a little green tops for those earrings to finish those off. And then I almost forgot, I want to make a little rouleau loop bow to potentially tack to the top of the neckline. And I say potentially because I'm not entirely sure I'm really going to like it. So I'm going to make it and then finish off everything else, try it all on together and see if I think that I want to keep it. And just those fussy little last steps to go, like finishing off my belt and adding my resin belt buckle, hemming the dress, making the tiny little 1/4-inch tube for the bow, and turning my little resin pieces into actual earrings. Oh goody, I'm filming while I'm moving my lights. Oh, and my mic. Okay, here we go. So my dress is done, my earrings are done, and my belt buckle is done. Like my matching band-aids between finishing this dress and now I sewed a pair of pants during which I managed to stab myself and cut myself with pins twice. So that's just how I roll. But I'm very happy with this dress. I don't actually know how it fits yet because I haven't tried it on yet, but I'm assuming that it's probably going to fit well because I've made this several times. I should probably not really assume that, but anyway, we'll see if I decide that my little shortening of the bodice was a good idea or not. And we're here to talk about the bow, which I have tacked on there with a pin. And I think it looks really cute. I don't really know if I'm going to like it once I'm wearing it. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to safety pin it from the inside because not only can I then decide to take it off, I can take it off to wash, which I probably would want to do because I imagine this might get a little like mangly in the laundry. And realistically, what that means is if I put it on with a safety pin, it's probably going to live the rest of its life on there with a safety pin because I have other dresses and they still have safety pins in them on the inside for things like that. So yeah, that's probably how it's going to go. By the time you see this video, it'll be a week until my birthday, and then I'll get to wear my lovely birthday dress for the year. And that's that for this year's birthday dress. I love how it turned out. I'll definitely be wearing this dress next week on my birthday. In the meantime, you can watch me sew last year's birthday dress or check out this other video YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. And maybe I'll go and straighten up that crooked bow a little bit. Happy sewing!